Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're tackling one of the most critical, yet honestly frequently misunderstood aspects of modern business. We are doing an exhaustive deep dive into a really fascinating premise. Enterprise technology alone, I don't care how advanced it is or how perfectly coded the architecture might be, simply does not guarantee digital transformation success. People do. It's the human element. Today, we're going to unpack the psychology, the hidden behaviors, and the specific strategic frameworks that ultimately dictate why massive company-wide system overhauls either thrive or absolutely crash and burn. So let's just dive right into this.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start off with Section 1, the ERP failure epidemic. Then we'll move into Section 2, the anatomy of user resistance. Section 3 will cover the silent software saboteurs. From there, Section 4, real-world failures and successes. We'll follow that up with Section 5, the ADKR readiness framework. And finally, we'll wrap up with Section 6, strategies for frontline adoption.
All right, Section 1, the ERP failure epidemic. Let's get into it. When organizations decide to pull the trigger and implement a massive enterprise resource planning system, an ERP, they are usually chasing some pretty lofty promises, right? They're looking for extreme operational efficiency, seamless data integration across all departments, and absolute top-down transparency. But the jarring reality is actually this incredibly staggering statistic. Research indicates that roughly 50% of all ERP implementations completely fail to meet the adopting organization's original expectations. Just think about the sheer magnitude of that for a second. Half of these massive, multi-million-dollar strategic projects essentially fall flat. And here is the absolutely crucial point that gets missed. It is rarely because of faulty code. It's not a server architecture issue, and it's certainly not bad hardware. The fundamental root barrier is end-user resistance. When the real test begins, when the system actually goes live on the floor, the people working within the organization, the major stakeholders who actually have to click the buttons, simply push back. And without their ongoing, active, enthusiastic support, the smooth operation of any integrated ERP system is literally impossible. It becomes an incredibly expensive paperweight.
And if you really want to understand the sheer financial scale of this problem, you don't need to look any further than the mid-2000s United States Air Force ECSS project. The Air Force attempted to implement this massive ERP called the Expeditionary Combat Support System. The goal was to replace around 240 scattered legacy systems. The price tag on this initiative? $1 billion, with a B. And what actually happened? Well, the project was ultimately scrapped entirely. A postmortem of the wreckage revealed a profound, fundamental failure to instill trust in the new system among the end users. The actual personnel on the ground simply did not want to abandon their established, familiar ways of working. It wasn't the tech. Culture, deep-rooted skepticism, and very human resistance brought a billion-dollar technological marvel straight to its knees.
Moving on to Section 2, Anatomy of User Resistance. Let's look at the psychological barriers.
To actually solve this multi-million-dollar problem, we have to get into the weeds. We have to deeply understand the specific psychological barriers and demographic nuances that trigger resistance across literally every level of an organization. You see, resistance isn't just generic stubbornness. It's not people just being difficult for the sake of it. It's a deeply human, incredibly complex reaction to change. Let's meticulously break down these granular psychological drivers. First off, you have the fear of uncertainty and job displacement. Look, when an ERP automates a manual task, like posting invoices or consolidating a monthly supply report, the immediate visceral reaction from the person who used to do that is, wait, is this system going to make me redundant? This automation anxiety is profound and honestly entirely rational from their perspective. Second, the loss of authority for legacy system gatekeepers. An ERP is designed to centralize data. If you were the seasoned warehouse manager whose tacit inside knowledge made you totally indispensable, a new, highly transparent inventory module directly threatens your unique authority and your status within the company. Third is the learning curve and interface overload. If the new UI is drastically different from what they know or just overly complex, user stress immediately spikes, which leads directly to cognitive fatigue. They just shut down. Fourth, workload spikes. This is a big one. During the critical transition phase, staff almost always have to perform extensive data cleanup and manual dual entry, entering stuff in the old system and the new one on top of their regular daily duties. This makes them feel completely overburdened and sets up a massively negative association with the software right out of the gate. And finally, misaligned interests. If a frontline worker perceives that this whole new system only exists to give upper management better high-level pie charts and analytics, while they themselves just get burdened with much stricter data entry rules, well, their internal motivation to adopt the system is going to drop to absolutely zero.
This quote here just brilliantly illustrates that exact frontline perspective. Modern ERPs and enterprise tools today often integrate some highly advanced communication and monitoring features, right? We're talking voice calls, automatic meeting recordings, direct chats, sometimes even keystroke logging or activity tracking. Now, while this is absolutely fantastic for high-level collaboration and operational efficiency, on the ground, it instantly triggers what we call the Big Brother surveillance syndrome. Employees naturally start wondering, okay, are these tools actually here to empower me, or are they being set up to catch me slacking off? If leadership doesn't proactively, aggressively, and transparently answer the fundamental question, what is in it for me, people will inevitably, 100% of the time, assume the worst. They're going to fear that their every conversation or every pause in their workflow is just being collected as evidence against them. Addressing this deeply ingrained fear requires profound empathy from leadership and an absolute, demonstrable commitment to privacy by design.
Section 3. The silent software saboteurs. The hidden pushback. We really need to pivot our narrative structure right here. We need to move from the obvious, easily identified complaints over to a far more dangerous phenomenon, and that is the hidden forms of resistance that quietly, systematically erode the entire value of an ERP investment. We can neatly contrast two very distinct types of pushback. On the left side, you've got loud resistance. Now, this is exactly what you'd expect. These are open complaints, formal union pushback, people literally storming out of training sessions or explicitly refusing to log in to the new client. While stressful, you can see it, and because you can see it, you can manage it. But on the right side, we have quiet resistance. And wow, this is incredibly dangerous to your project. This is when users are nodding along in all the change management meetings. They smile, they ask polite, standard questions. But behind the scenes, they are quietly withholding the critical input that actually drives real progress. They heavily rely on what we call shadow processes, meaning they continue to manually update their old, localized spreadsheets in secret because the new software feels just way too intimidating or restrictive. They are going through the motions, but they haven't actually adopted a thing.
Now, the absolute pinnacle of this quiet resistance is a persona we call the disengaged power user. This is your spreadsheet master. This is the person who knows the old legacy system better than literally anyone else in the building. When you go and implement a new ERP, they'll attend the meetings and appear entirely engaged on the surface. But psychologically, they view this new system as a massive existential threat to their very identity as the go-to organizational expert. So they feign compliance, but they actively start hoarding their tribal knowledge, their specific shortcuts, and all their vital workarounds. Similarly, in this camp, you have passive data gatekeepers. These are employees strictly responsible for supplying clean operational data who suddenly, mysteriously, start delaying their email responses. They start questioning the most basic data fields, and they deliberately fail to flag obvious inaccuracies. They quietly bottleneck the entire implementation. They act fully supportive on paper while strategically grinding organizational progress to a complete halt in practice. It's quiet sabotage, and it's lethal to an ERP rollout.
Section 4. Real-world failures and successes. Let's ground all these abstract psychological concepts in some real-world corporate case studies, just to prove that these subtle human behaviors have actual $100 million consequences. Let's trace the historical lineage of this. Back in 1999, Hershey Foods attempted a massive SAP implementation. To avoid impending Y2K issues, they aggressively condensed what should have been a standard 4-year rollout project into just 30 months. The result of that massive rush? They didn't leave nearly enough time to properly train their frontline employees. The highly complex system went live right before their absolute busiest season, the Halloween rush. The warehouse staff simply couldn't figure out how to operate the software, and as a direct result, Hershey failed to ship $100 million worth of chocolate. It was a catastrophic failure driven purely by rushed human readiness. Then, fast forward to 2013. Avon spent $125 million developing a highly customized order management system for their direct sales representatives. But the user interface was so notoriously unintuitive, and the change management process was handled so poorly that a full 1/3 of their sales reps literally quit their jobs rather than use the new software. Avon was forced to just abandon the project entirely. Now contrast those absolute disasters with a much more modern success story, Avangrid. They're a large energy utility, and they touch 4,100 employees with a highly complex SAP rollout. But they invested heavily, and I mean heavily, in a dedicated, robust change management office, and they built a comprehensive network of peer change champions. Because they proactively managed that human element perfectly, An astounding 90% of their users achieved full proficiency at launch, and only 10% of employees needed any kind of refresher training post-go live. That is the power of getting the human side right.
And I absolutely love this next example from Coca-Cola because it is so profoundly actionable. When rolling out their ERP, Coca-Cola looked at the elephant in the room, which was automation anxiety, and they confronted it head-on. They publicly, officially guaranteed 0 layoffs as a result of the new automated system. No one was going to lose their job to the software. Instead, they pledged substantial corporate resources to reskill and upskill their existing employees. They wanted them to work alongside the new technology in higher value, far more strategic roles. This was an absolute masterstroke of change management. By transparently guaranteeing job security and offering tangible professional growth, they instantly flipped the script. They converted a fearful, highly resistant workforce into eager, cooperative early adopters. They systematically proved to their staff that enterprise software exists to eliminate mundane, repetitive tasks, not to eliminate valuable human jobs.
Section 5. The ADACAR Framework. How we actually systemize this success.
So how exactly do we systemize that kind of amazing success? Well, we introduce a comprehensive, structured, outcome-driven methodology that is specifically designed to systematically conquer both that loud and quiet resistance we talked about. This conceptually maps out the entire transformation journey. On the far left, we have the crucial antecedents. These are the driving factors, like the severe limitations of your legacy enterprise asset management systems, your overarching strategic goals for digital transformation, and your fundamental corporate need to scale. These are the things forcing the change. In the middle, the actual behavior taking place is that highly complex, often messy transition from the old, comfortable way of doing things to the new ERP environment. But the key moderating variables, the things actually determining if you succeed or fail, are things like how well your key performance indicators are developed and communicated. All of this workflow ultimately flows into the final consequence on the far right: true, sustainable organizational readiness. And the absolute premier tool we use to meticulously measure and manage those skill, technology, and process gaps throughout this journey is the 8KR framework.
Let's meticulously break down this 80KR progression step by step, because this is the secret sauce. First up is awareness. You absolutely must establish a clear, shared understanding across the company of exactly why this change is necessary before you do anything else. What is the undeniable business logic? If people don't know why, they won't care how. Second is desire. This directly attacks that deep-seated, what's in it for me fear we discussed earlier. Leadership must actively foster engagement and incentivize participation at the ground level. Third, knowledge. This is where robust, highly tailored training programs come into play. You have to teach the exact technical workflows required, not just generic overviews, but exactly what buttons to push. Fourth is ability. Now, theoretical knowledge isn't enough. Employees desperately need hands-on mentorship, safe sandbox environments to practice in, and practical experience so they do not freeze up in a panic on go-live day. It's about building muscle memory. And finally, reinforcement. Sustaining the change through long-term performance metrics and continuous constructive feedback. This is precisely how you prevent employees from quietly regressing back to their familiar shadow processes and hidden Excel sheets. By actively measuring and rewarding proper system usage long after the launch party is over, you effectively dismantle the mechanisms of quiet resistance entirely.
Finally, Section 6, Frontline Adoption. Let's talk about highly actionable strategies. It is time to translate that theoretical 80KR framework we just covered into highly actionable, granular strategies that business leaders can deploy directly on the ground during those crucial transition and post-implementation phases. First up is establishing a Functional Readiness Task Force, or an FRTF. Honestly, this is absolutely essential. You nominate cross-functional mid-level managers to act as horizontal change agents across the business. They aren't top-down dictators enforcing arbitrary rules. They are trusted, recognizable peers who bridge that critical, often dangerous gap between lofty C-suite corporate strategy and local, day-to-day, ground-level execution. Next, leadership KPIs. Look, you simply cannot just roll out software and hope for adoption. Hope is not a strategy. You must structurally embed readiness metrics, things like ongoing training participation rates, daily system login frequency, and employee sentiment scores, directly into manager performance evaluations. If their bonus depends on their team using the software, they will make sure it gets used. This strictly forces accountability long after the official go-live date. Finally, transparent communications. You must always, constantly, clearly explain the why behind the software in simple, highly accessible terms to immediately reduce frontline anxiety and build deep foundational trust. To actually execute those communications effectively, you really need a highly structured, phased approach. What we're looking at is a targeted 6-week ERP readiness campaign timeline that illustrates exactly how to roll this out psychologically. In week 1, you don't blast them with tech specs. You launch with a simple, easily digestible awareness bulletin just to introduce the concept. Weeks 2 to 4 involve interactive departmental town halls and highly accessible digital FAQs. Now, week 3 is vital. You utilize a crucial mid-campaign pulse survey to actively gauge employee sentiment. You're hunting for those hidden pockets of quiet resistance before they metastasize. And then weeks 4 to 6 are specifically dedicated to refining your training support exactly on the data you got from that survey. The fundamental psychological necessity here is actively shifting away from overwhelming, highly complex technical deep dives early in the process. Instead, you are utilizing accessible, familiar digital bulletins. You are systematically, intentionally building user confidence incrementally, week by week.
To round out our tactical playbook today, here are the absolute latest, most effective modern tactics designed specifically to win over the frontline workforce. First, fully embrace micro changes and incremental software pilots over those massive, highly risky big bang rollouts. Big bangs are terrifying for users. Small, contained pilots allow you to identify bugs and refine the system with actual users before you scale it company-wide. Second, establish genuine, real-time feedback loops using short, frictionless digital surveys or even dedicated break room kiosks so workers can immediately voice their daily frustrations and challenges without any fear of reprisal. Third, utilize modern digital adoption tools. We're talking about in-app tooltips, interactive overlays, and guided walkthroughs that instruct users directly within the software interface. This dramatically reduces friction and cognitive load. It's like having a tutor right there on the screen. Fourth, officially appoint trusted ERP champions directly from the frontline staff to support and train their peers in a localized, totally non-threatening way. People learn best from their friends. And lastly, to definitively prevent those Big Brother surveillance fears we broke down earlier, explicitly ensure privacy by design. Make absolutely certain that any communication tracking features are strictly opt-in and publish crystal clear, radically transparent rules about exactly how employee data is, and more importantly, is not being used by management.
So as we wrap up this exhaustive deep dive into organizational change management, I really want to leave you with a provocative final thought. You can spend $1 billion on the most sophisticated, beautifully designed software architecture in the world. You can write flawlessly optimized code. But at the end of the day, your technology might be fully ready to go live, but are your people? Overcoming human resistance isn't about ruthlessly forcing compliance from the top down. It's about actively, empathetically transforming their fear into genuine empowerment and turning their confusion into profound capability. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Take these rigorous frameworks we've discussed, look very closely at your own organizational readiness, and make absolutely certain that your people are as comprehensively upgraded as your digital systems. See you next time.